Anybody help me! Leave me right now! Help me, let me out! Get me out of here!
Nobody helps you. This is my garage.
Let me out, please!
The police are coming for you! No.
At 6:12 a.m., my garage door opened by itself. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't even poured my coffee yet. I was standing in my kitchen when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the garage camera. I tapped it, still half asleep, and that's when I saw her. Beverly Grayson, the HOA vice president, walking into my garage like she paid the mortgage. She had a clipboard tucked under her arm and a bright orange vest on, the kind city inspectors wear, like she was trying to cosplay authority. She didn't knock, she didn't call, she didn't hesitate. She stepped right over the threshold of my garage like it was community property. I froze, staring at my phone screen. She was moving things, touching boxes, kicking aside a bucket of tools with her foot. She leaned down to peer into my workbench drawers and actually wrote something on her clipboard, shaking her head like she'd just uncovered a crime scene. Out loud, she said, "Unacceptable. Completely unacceptable." I could hear it through the camera mic. My chest went tight. This wasn't her first visit. This was just the first time she'd come inside. I rewound the footage, watched it again. The moment she slipped between the door and the frame before it could close, the way she smiled when she saw it hadn't fully latched, like she'd been waiting for this exact chance. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from disbelief. Who does that? Who walks into someone's garage at sunrise and calls it an inspection? I hit the speaker button. "What do you think you're doing?" My voice echoed through the garage. Beverly jumped so hard she dropped her pen. She looked straight up at the camera, squinting like she was offended the camera existed. "HOA inspection," she snapped. "You've been warned about violations. I'm documenting." I told her she was trespassing. She laughed, actually laughed. "HOA bylaws give me authority," she said. "If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't be nervous." That's when I realized something important. She thought she was safe in there. She thought she was in control. She thought this was just another scare tactic that would end with me apologizing and promising to comply. She had no idea the garage door behind her had just finished closing. The lock clicked into place with a soft metallic sound. She didn't notice it. Not at first. She walked deeper into the garage, inspecting shelves, poking at a stack of labeled bins like she was hoping to find drugs or explosives instead of Christmas decorations and paint cans. She kicked one of my storage boxes and frowned. "Improper storage," she muttered, writing again. My phone buzzed with another alert. Door secured. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply said, "You're not leaving until the sheriff gets here." She spun around. "Excuse me?" She marched to the door and yanked the handle. It didn't move. She tried again, harder, nothing. Her face changed. The confident HOA smile melted into panic. "Open this door right now," she shouted at the camera. I told her calmly, "You broke into my garage. I'm calling the sheriff." That's when she started screaming about lawsuits, about fines, about how she'd ruin me. She slammed her fist against the metal door and yelled that she had every right to be there. I watched from my phone as she paced in circles, ranting to herself, knocking over a broom in the process. My coffee went cold on the counter. I didn't care. I had already called the sheriff. While we waited, she tried everything. She yelled, she begged, she accused me of kidnapping. She even tried to wedge the door open with her clipboard until it snapped in half. And all I could think was how confident she'd looked walking in. How sure she'd been that no one would stop her. How she'd walked into my garage like it was her personal kingdom. She wanted to inspect me. Instead, she inspected the consequences. I've lived in this house for almost 6 years, and in all that time I've never been the kind of neighbor anyone complains about. I don't throw parties. I don't blast music. I don't park on the lawn or leave trash cans out for days. Most mornings my routine is exactly the same. I wake up early, make coffee, and spend an hour in the garage before work. That garage isn't some chaotic mess of junk and broken appliances. It's the one place in the house that actually feels organized. Clean shelves, labeled bins, tools hung neatly on pegboards. It smells like sawdust and motor oil, which to me smells like calm. The garage is where I go when my head gets too loud. After my wife passed, the house felt too big and too quiet. The living room reminded me of evenings we'd never get back. The bedroom reminded me of mornings that would never come again. The garage didn't hold memories like that. It was neutral ground. So I started fixing things. First, it was small stuff, a broken chair, a neighbor's wobbly table. Then I started building things, birdhouses, toy cars, little wooden puzzles. Not because I planned to sell them, just because using my hands made the hours go by faster. Eventually, I found myself making things for other people. My sister's kid wanted a train set. A coworker asked for a bookshelf. A neighbor asked if I could fix a broken walker instead of them throwing it out. Word spread slowly. Nothing dramatic, just quiet requests. Hey, can you help with this? Do you think you could build something like that? I never charged. If someone insisted, I told them to buy the materials. That was it. So, when people say it was just a garage, they don't get it. That space was my therapy, my routine, my way of staying useful when everything else in my life felt like it had fallen apart. I wasn't running a business. I wasn't hosting loud groups. It was usually just me, a radio playing softly, and the sound of sandpaper or a drill. If anything, my house was quieter than most on the block. The HOA never had a problem with me at first. My yard was neat. My driveway was clean. My trash cans were hidden behind a fence. I painted the house the approved color. I even went to meetings once in a while. Sat in the back, listened, and went home. I was invisible. The way most people want to be in an HOA. The first time Beverly noticed me, it wasn't because I broke a rule. It was because she saw me unloading wood from my car. Just a few boards from the hardware store. She slowed her SUV down in front of my house like she was casing it, rolled down her window and stared. I nodded at her. She didn't nod back. She just kept looking at the wood like I was aiding stolen property. A few days later, I got my first notice. Unauthorized use of garage, that was the wording. No explanation, just a vague threat of fines if I didn't cease activity. I went to the HOA office, asked what activity. They said someone reported I was running a business out of my garage. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so wrong. I showed them pictures, my tools, my projects, the shelves, the lack of customers. I told them I was retired, I worked part-time from home, and I just liked building things. They said they'd note it. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. From then on, it felt like I was being watched. Every time I opened the garage door, I noticed her car parked somewhere it hadn't been before. Every time I worked on something, there'd be a new complaint. Noise, clutter, commercial activity, unsafe materials, none of it stuck. The HOA manager even apologized once and said, "She's enthusiastic." That was their word for it, enthusiastic. But the thing is, I didn't fight back. I didn't get aggressive. I didn't start drama. I kept my head down. I cleaned even more. I bought a decibel meter to prove my tools weren't loud. I moved my work to daytime hours only. I labeled every bin. I took photos of everything. Not because I wanted conflict, but because I didn't want trouble. I wanted peace. I'd lived enough life to know that once someone decides you're the problem, logic doesn't always matter. So I did everything by the book. I followed every rule they threw at me. If they said no extension cords, I installed outlets. If they said store paint properly, I bought cabinets. I even invited the HOA manager into my garage once so he could see it himself. He walked through, nodded and said, "Looks better than mine." The irony was that what I was building wasn't even for me most of the time. One of my projects was a set of wooden step stools for an older neighbor who couldn't reach her cabinets. Another was a little toolbox for a kid down the street who wanted to build like you. I made a rack for someone's fishing rods, a ramp for someone's porch. I wasn't doing anything shady. I wasn't hiding anything. My garage wasn't a secret lab or a chop shop. It was a workshop in the simplest sense of the word. That's why it hurt when she called it an eyesore at a meeting. She didn't know what any of it meant to me. She just saw shelves and tools and decided it was ugly. She didn't see the hours I spent sanding edges so a kid wouldn't get splinters. She didn't see the handwritten thank you notes taped to the wall. She didn't see the photo of my wife I kept near the bench because she always liked seeing what I made. She made it sound like I was lowering the value of the neighborhood by existing. like my quiet little projects were some kind of threat to property prices. And people believed her at first because she spoke with confidence. Clipboard confidence, HOA confidence, the kind that sounds official even when it isn't. That's the part that still gets me. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't loud. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't ignoring rules. I was just there, living, fixing things, staying out of the way. And somehow that was enough to make me a target. If I had been rude or careless or genuinely disruptive, I could have understood it. But I wasn't. My biggest crime was keepy. Busy in my own garage. I paid my dues. I trimmed my hedges. I waved at neighbors. I minded my business. And that's what made what she did feel so personal. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. She didn't want compliance. She wanted submission. She wanted to walk past my house and not see me doing something she didn't approve of. She wanted to be able to point and say, "That's not allowed," even when it was. So when she stepped into my garage that morning, it wasn't just an inspection. It was her crossing a line she'd been inching toward for months. And I think that's why it hit so hard. Because for me, that garage wasn't just a room with a door. It was the one place I still felt like myself, the one place that hadn't been taken over by grief or paperwork or HOA nonsense. She didn't see a man minding his own business. She saw a problem to eliminate. And I think the reason people end up siding with someone like me in a story like this isn't because I'm special. It's because most people know what it feels like to just want to be left alone, to do something harmless that brings them peace, to follow the rules and still get punished by someone who needs power more than they need fairness. That's what she didn't understand, and that's what made what she did feel so wrong. Beverly didn't look like a villain. That was part of the problem. She looked like someone who belonged on a brochure. Perfect hair, stiff posture, clipboard always tucked under her arm like it was an extension of her spine. She drove a white SUV with an HOA decal on the window and parked it where everyone could see it. She didn't wave when she drove past. She assessed. Every house was something to judge. Every driveway was a potential violation. Every neighbor was a potential suspect. She liked standing in the middle of the street with her arms crossed, staring at people's homes like she was measuring their worth. If your trash can was out too long, she noticed. If your grass was an inch too tall, she noticed. If your curtains were the wrong shade of beige, she noticed. And when she noticed, she didn't speak to you like a person, she spoke to you like a rule book. The first time she spoke to me directly, she didn't say hello. She said, "You're operating a workshop." Not a question, a declaration, like she'd already decided what I was guilty of. I told her I was building a shelf. She tilted her head like she was studying an insect. "That's commercial activity," she said. I told her it wasn't. She smiled like she'd caught me lying. "We'll see." That was how every interaction went. She didn't ask, she announced, she didn't listen, she documented, and she never missed a chance to remind you who she thought she was. As HOA Vice President, according to subsection B, you should be grateful we're lenient. It was always about authority, about position, about her. She didn't knock on doors like a normal neighbor, she banged. Sharp, quick knocks like a police officer. And when you opened the door, she leaned in, looking past you into your house, scanning for something to write down. It didn't matter if you were in pajamas. It didn't matter if you were eating dinner. She acted like your life was interrupting her inspection. Once, I watched her stop a delivery driver in front of my house and demand to know what was in the boxes. The poor guy looked confused. "She's aid. We don't allow unauthorized business operations." He said he was delivering a microwave. She wrote something down anyway. She walked through the neighborhood like it was hers, like the sidewalks were extensions of her office. She told kids not to ride bikes on the street. She told dog walkers their leashes were too long. She told a neighbor to repaint their door because the shade of blue was emotionally aggressive. I wish I were making that up. She actually said that what made her dangerous wasn't just that she loved rules, it was that she loved power. And rules were just the costume she wore to feel important. You could see it in her eyes when people backed down, when someone apologized, When someone sighed and said, "Fine, I'll fix it," she drank that in. It fed her. When I started getting notices, they weren't polite reminders. They were threats. Failure to comply will result in fines. Continued non-compliance may lead to legal action. And when I called to ask what I was supposed to change, she answered the phone like she'd been waiting for it. "You know what you did," she said once. I told her I didn't. She laughed. Ignorance isn't an excuse. She showed up at my house more than once without warning. Not for meetings, not for scheduled inspections, just there, standing in my driveway with that clipboard, tapping her pen against it like she was bored, waiting for me to fail. She peered into my open garage from the sidewalk and said, "That's a lot of equipment for a hobby." I told her I like tools. She said, "Tools attract liability." She talked about my garage like it was dangerous, like it was contagious. What if someone gets hurt? What if there's a fire? What if neighbors think this is allowed? Everything was framed as fear. Fear of what others might do if they saw me doing something harmless. Fear of losing control. And she crossed lines like she didn't even see them. She stepped onto my driveway without asking. She lifted the edge of a top to look underneath. She leaned into my garage without stepping in and said, "I can smell chemicals." I wasn't even using chemicals. I was sanding wood. She didn't care. She had decided I was wrong, and she was going to make reality match that decision. She talked down to people, especially people who didn't argue back, especially people who looked tired, especially people who didn't want conflict. If you pushed back, she got louder. If you stayed calm, she got sharper. "We can do this the easy way or the expensive way," she told me once, like she was quoting a movie. She loved saying things like, "You're lucky it's me and not the city," or "I'm protecting the community." But it never felt like protection. It felt like surveillance, like she was waiting for someone to slip so she could pounce. At meetings, she sat up front, flipping through papers even when no one was talking to her. When people complained about her, she smiled and said, "Rules don't care about feelings." And people nodded, because she sounded official. She sounded like order. But what she really sounded like was someone who had never been told no. She believed she was untouchable. You could see it in the way she spoke to the HOA manager, cutting him off mid-sentence. In the way she told neighbors, "I don't need your permission." In the way she said, "You don't understand the bylaws, like bylaws real language only she could speak." The more I stayed calm, the more she escalated. It was like my refusal to get emotional offended her. She wanted reactions. She wanted me angry or scared. When she didn't get that, she tried harder. More notices, more visits, more inspections. She once told me, "People like you always think they're the exception." I asked what she meant. She said, "You think your little projects make you special." That's when I realized she wasn't just enforcing rules. She was offended by the idea that I was comfortable, that I was doing something I enjoyed without her approval, that I had a space she couldn't control. My garage wasn't on her list of allowed activities, so she wanted it gone. She treated my home like it was a business she could shut down. She talked about me to other neighbors like I wasn't there. "He's a problem," she told one of them. "He doesn't respect the community." The neighbor asked what I'd done. She said, "He knows I didn't." She twisted things. A tool became industrial equipment. A radio became noise disturbance. A shelf became unauthorized structure. Every normal thing became suspicious once she touched it with her words. And when she finally walked into my garage that morning, it felt like the natural next step for her. Of course she did. Of course she thought she could. She'd been pushing boundaries for months, stepping closer, leaning further, acting like my space was hers to judge. In her mind, there was no line she wasn't allowed to cross, because she believed the HOA made her bigger than the law. When I told her she was trespassing, she didn't apologize. She didn't hesitate. She said, "I have authority." Not, "I thought this was allowed." Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "I have authority." Like that was a spell. Like saying it made it true. Even when the door locked behind her, she didn't panic right away. She was angry, offended, outraged that something wasn't obeying her. She pounded on the door and shouted about fines and lawsuits and reports. She didn't ask to be let out. She demanded it. Because in her head, people didn't trap her. She trapped them. She didn't see herself as a neighbor who made a mistake. She saw herself as a victim of disrespect, as someone whose power had been challenged. And that was unacceptable to her. That's what made her a villain. Not the rules, not the clipboard, not even the HOA. It was the belief that she could go anywhere, say anything, and never face consequences. That her role gave her ownership over other people's lives. That your home stopped being yours once she decided to care about it. She didn't break into my garage because she was confused. She broke into it because she thought she was allowed to, because no one had ever stopped her before. I didn't set a trap because I wanted revenge. I set it because I could see what was coming. Every interaction with her followed the same pattern. She escalated when she wasn't challenged. She pushed further when no one stopped her. She tested boundaries like a kid, seeing how close they can get to the edge without falling, and I knew sooner or later she was going to step inside my garage, not peek, not complain, not threaten, but actually cross that line. So I stopped reacting and started preparing. I installed 2 extra cameras, one facing the driveway and one inside the garage aimed at the door. Not hidden, not secret, just there, quietly recording. I upgraded the garage door system to something more secure, not a complicated spy device, just a modern lock that engaged automatically when the door fully closed. Something I could control from my phone, something legal, something designed to keep intruders out, not trap people in, and that part mattered to me because I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to scare her. I wanted evidence. I wanted proof of what she'd been doing all along. I wanted her to be caught doing exactly what she always threatened to do, and for that to happen, I needed her to think she was safe. I needed her to think I wasn't home. I needed her to believe she could walk in and walk out like she owned the place. So I changed my routine just enough for her to notice. I left my car down the street one morning. I kept the garage door open longer than usual while I worked. I made it look casual, like I forgot to close it, like I was careless for once. And sure enough, within 2 days, her SUV rolled by slower than usual. She looked, she circled the block, she parked down the street, she watched, and I watched her watching me, through the camera, through my phone, like 2 people playing chess without speaking. And I could tell she was building up to something, because she stopped sending notices, she stopped knocking, she stopped calling, she went quiet, and with her, quiet never meant peace, it meant planning. So the morning it happened, I made sure the garage door was open, I left a few tools out, I left the light on, I made it look like I had just stepped inside for a second. Then I walked into the house and waited, coffee in hand, phone in the other, watching the driveway feed, and when her SUV appeared at the corner of the screen, my heart didn't race, it slowed, because this was the moment all her behavior had been pointing toward. She parked crooked, didn't even try to hide it, walked straight up the driveway like she was late for an appointment, didn't knock, didn't call out, just leaned forward and stepped inside, clipboard first, like that thing was a shield. She looked around like she was already writing in her head, like she had rehearsed what she was going to say later, and I let her go further in, not because I wanted drama, but because I needed her past the threshold. I needed it clear that she had entered without permission. I needed the camera to show her crossing that invisible line, and when the door slid down behind her, slow and quiet, I waited until it fully closed, until the lock engaged, until my phone buzzed with company. Information. And only then did I speak, through the speaker, not shouting, not angry, just calm, telling her she was trespassing and that the sheriff was on the way, and the change in her was instant. Confidence to confusion, confusion to rage. She rattled the handle like it was broken on purpose. She yelled about authority, about bylaws, about lawsuits. She pointed at the camera like it was a person she could intimidate. She demanded I open the door. She said I was violating her rights. She said I was committing a crime. She said I would regret it. And I didn't respond to any of that, because the point wasn't to argue, the point was to let her keep talking. To let her say everything she thought she could get away with, to let the camera record it all, her admitting she was inspecting, her admitting she entered on purpose, her saying she had every right, her showing exactly how she saw herself, and while she paced and shouted and kicked a box over, I stood in my kitchen and waited, not because I enjoyed it, but because for once the situation wasn't being controlled by the loudest person, it was being controlled by the facts. She had walked in without permission. She was now locked inside a private garage. She was on camera, and the law was about to arrive, and that's what made it satisfying. Not that she was stuck, but that she had done it to herself. She wasn't tricked, she wasn't pushed, she wasn't forced. She followed her own habits, her own entitlement, her own belief that no one would stop her, straight into a situation she couldn't talk her way out of. And when the sheriff arrived and opened the door, and she stormed out still shouting about inspections and violatio. Ends. The footage showed everything, her entry, her words, her meltdown, her lies. And in that moment, all the power she thought she had drained out of her. Because power doesn't come from clipboards or threats, it comes from staying within the law, and she hadn't. And that's why the trap worked. Not because it was clever, but because it was patient, because it used her behavior instead of force, because it didn't create a crime, it revealed one, because it didn't escalate violence, it escalated accountability, and that's what viewers love, not pain, not humiliation, but the moment when someone who thinks they're untouchable meets a rule they can't rewrite, when someone who abuses authority runs into real authority, when someone who crosses boundaries finally hits one that holds, and the reason it feels good to watch isn't because someone suffered, it's because the suffering came from their own choices, from walking where they weren't allowed, from believing no one would call their bluff, from assuming control where they had none, and that's why it stays in people's minds, why they rewatch it, why they comment, why they argue about it, because it feels like a puzzle being solved, like chaos meeting order, like a bully finally tripping over the line they kept daring others to draw, and all of it happened without shouting, without pushing, without touching, just a door closing, a lock engaging, and the law being called. And sometimes, that's all justice really is. Not loud, not dramatic, just perfectly timed. When the siren finally cut through the quiet of the morning, it didn't sound dramatic. At first, it sounded almost out of place, like a reminder that something official was about to happen. And that was the moment the balance shifted, because up until then, she had been the one who used authority as a weapon. She had been the one who threatened fines and reports and legal action. She had been the one who spoke like she already had a badge in her pocket. But now there was an actual sheriff's cruiser rolling down the street, and suddenly her words didn't carry weight anymore. They just echoed inside a locked garage, and I could see it on the camera the second she heard the siren. Her posture changed. Her pacing stopped, and her face tightened like she was trying to rearrange the story in her head into something that made her look innocent. She smoothed her hair. She straightened her vest. She picked up her broken clipboard and held it like a shield again, because that was all she had left, a prop, a costume, something to make her feel like she still mattered. And when the cruiser pulled up, two neighbors had already stepped outside, one with a coffee mug, one with a phone raised recording, because nothing spreads faster in a neighborhood than trouble, and nothing draws a crowd faster than the promise of seeing someone powerful lose control. And when the deputy stepped out of the car, he didn't look impressed, he didn't look angry, he just looked tired, like someone who had seen enough nonsense to know when something didn't add up. And he walked up to the garage door, and I opened it from my phone slow enough that the cameras caught everything. The door lifting her, standing there mid-rant, pointing at the camera, like it was still an enemy, and the light spilling in on her like a stage spotlight, and she immediately started talking. She didn't wait to be asked. She launched into it about inspections and violations and bylaws and how I had trapped her illegally and how I was obstructing her duty. And she spoke fast because she always did when she thought she could control the situation. And the deputy held up a hand and asked one simple question. Did you have permission to enter this garage? And she hesitated not long but long enough, and that pause did more damage than anything else, because the neighbors saw it, the phones caught it, the cameras caught it, and in that tiny moment, all of her certainty cracked, because she couldn't say yes and she couldn't admit no. So she tried to slide around it by saying HOA rules allowed it, and that was when I spoke and said, I never gave her permission. And the deputy looked at me, then back at her, and asked another simple question. Did the homeowner invite you inside? And again, she stalled, and that was it. That was the moment the power flipped, because everything she had built her image on depended on sounding certain, and now she sounded unsure. And when the deputy asked for proof, she didn't have any. She didn't have a written notice. She didn't have an appointment. She didn't have a warrant. She didn't have anything except a clipboard and a habit of not being questioned. And the deputy asked me if I had footage, and I said yes, and I pulled it up on my phone and showed him her stepping inside on her own, and her saying she was inspecting, and her saying she had authority, and him watching it quietly nodding, and then asking if I had locked the door on purpose, and I told him the door auto-locks, and I had called as soon as I realized she was inside, and that was true, and it mattered, because intent is everything. And while this was happening, more neighbors came out. One stood on his porch, one leaned over a fence. One woman whispered something to another, and suddenly Beverly wasn't the inspector anymore. She was the show, and she could feel it because her voice got higher and sharper, and she started accusing me of setting her up. And that only made it worse, because now she sounded defensive instead of official, and the deputy didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just told her calmly that entering private property without permission is trespassing, regardless of HOA status. And that sentence landed harder than any shout, because it stripped her of the only thing she believed protected her, and she looked around like she expected someone to back her up. And no one did, because people had been dealing with her for months. And this was the first time they saw her on the wrong side of the badge. And the deputy asked for her ID, and she handed it over with shaking hands. And the neighbor with the phone zoomed in, and someone else muttered, "I knew it." And suddenly the story was no longer about my garage. It was about her being caught, and she tried one last time to regain control by saying she would file a complaint, and the deputy said, "You're free to do that, but right now you entered a garage without permission." And that's a problem, and that was the climax. Not a shout, not a fight, not a chase, just a simple statement of fact. And in that moment, all the power she had been using on everyone else turned around and faced her, and she shrank under it. She didn't look big anymore. He didn't look important. She looked like a person who had made a bad choice in front of witnesses, and the neighbors saw it, and they didn't hide it. Some shook their heads, some whispered, some filmed, and I could almost feel the shift in the air, like the neighborhood itself exhaled. Because for once, it wasn't one of us being lectured. It was her. And when the deputy told her she would be cited for trespassing, she argued again, but quieter. Now less confident. And the deputy told her she was done for the morning and to leave. And when she walked past the neighbors, she didn't look at anyone. She kept her head down. And that alone was something none of us had ever seen before. And when her SUV pulled away, the street felt different, like something heavy had been lifted, and people stayed outside longer than usual because everyone wanted to talk about it. Everyone wanted to confirm what they saw. Everyone wanted to say, "I can't believe she did that." And for me, the satisfaction didn't come from watching her panic. It came from watching the story change, because for months, the story had been that she was the rule, and we were the problem. And now the story was that she had crossed a line and the law had noticed. And that flip is what people love to watch, because it's rare in real life. And clear in this moment, the one who threatened the police became the one facing them. The one who claimed authority lost it. The one who watched everyone else got watched. And that reversal is pure dopamine, because it feels like order returning, not through force, but through exposure. And the reason it hits so hard is because it happens in front of everyone. Not in secret, not behind closed doors, but on a driveway with cameras, ND neighbors, and a uniform, and a simple question she couldn't answer. And from that day on, when she drove through the neighborhood, people didn't see an enforcer anymore. They saw the woman who got locked in a garage, and that image stuck, because power is fragile, and once people see it crack, they never believe in it the same way again. And that's what made it the climax, not the lock, not the yelling, but the moment the badge stood where the clipboard used to, and everyone saw the difference. After that morning, things didn't snap back to normal right away, but they shifted in a way that could never be undone. The HOA didn't send notices for a while, the street stayed quiet, and people looked at each other differently when they passed on their walks, like we were all sharing a secret that didn't need to be said out loud. Beverly didn't show up for the next meeting, then she didn't show up for the one after that either, and when she finally did, it was only to collect her things from the office. Her name was removed from the website, her photo disappeared from the board listing, and the tone of the emails changed overnight from threatening to neutral, like someone had flipped a switch from control to caution. The fine came first, official and plain, trespassing citation, a line item she couldn't talk her way out of. Then the board announced they were investigating her conduct, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, which somehow made it more serious. Neighbors started talking about other things she'd done, things they had shrugged off before, how she'd gone into yards without asking, how she'd photographed people's windows, how she'd told delivery drivers where to park like she owned He Street, and all of that started stacking up now that no one was afraid to say it. The power she had lived on vanished when people realized it had never been real in the first place. It had only existed because everyone assumed it did, and once that assumption cracked, the rest followed. The board voted her out before the next month ended. No ceremony, just a short line in the minutes that said position vacated due to misconduct. And when she drove through the neighborhood after that, she didn't slow down anymore. She didn't stop. She didn't look. She just passed through like someone trying not to be seen. Her reputation didn't explode. It collapsed. It folded in on itself. People stopped answering her texts, stopped nodding when she walked by, stopped treating her like an authority, and started treating her like a warning. And the strangest part was how quiet it all became after that. No more notes on my door, no more SUV idling at the curb, no more clipboard tapping on my driveway, just mornings that felt like mornings again. I went back to working with the garage door open, and nothing happened. I turned on the radio and nothing happened. Neighbors waved and nothing happened. And that nothing felt like the biggest win of all, because peace doesn't announce itself. It just shows up. When the noise leaves, the HOA changed its tone completely. Inspections became scheduled. Complaints became specific. Everything suddenly needed paperwork and permission, like someone had realized how dangerous pretending to be in charge could be. And for the first time in a long time, the rules felt like rules instead of weapons. I didn't celebrate what happened to her because it wasn't about watching someone fall. It was about watching a situation end. The tension that had sat in my chest for months finally drained away. I could work without looking over my shoulder. I could leave my door open without wondering who was watching, and the garage went back to being what it was always meant to be, a place to build things, not defend them. People asked me later if I felt bad for her, and I had to think about it because the truth was complicated. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't enjoy seeing her embarrassed, but I didn't regret standing my ground either, because what she did wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern, and patterns don't stop unless something interrupts them. The story spread through the neighborhood, and then beyond it, because people love a story where power gets reversed, where someone who says rules don't care about feelings suddenly has to face one, and everyone had their own version of her, their own clipboard person, their own small tyrant, so it stuck. And what stayed with people wasn't the lock or the yelling or the citation, it was the shift. The moment when someone who thought they could do anything found out they couldn't. And that's why the ending mattered, because it wasn't dramatic, it was ordinary. She didn't disappear in handcuffs on the news, she disappeared from influence, and that kind of ending feels real. She moved on to some other place, some other role, some other story. But here she was finished, and the neighborhood kept going without her shadow over it. The kids rode their bikes again without being told to slow down. The trash cans stayed out an extra hour without panic, and I kept building things without feeling like I had to justify them. And every now and then someone would bring it up and shake their head and say, "I still can't believe she thought she could just walk in." And I would shrug because the truth was simple. She didn't think she could. She believed she should. And that belief cost her everything she built on it. And in the end, there was no big speech, no lecture, no banner that said justice served. Just a street that felt normal again. And a lesson that spread quietly from house to house. Not about garages or HOAs or locks, but about boundaries. About the line between rules and control. About what happens when someone confuses authority with ownership. And when people ask me what I learned from it, I don't say anything clever. I just say that sometimes the best way to deal with someone who thinks they're untouchable is to stop arguing and let the truth catch up to them. Because it always does eventually. And when it does, it doesn't need drama, it just needs witnesses. And that's why the story ends the way it does. Not with shouting but with silence. Not with fear but with space. Not with a villain on a throne but with a neighborhood that finally breathed again. She thought she was enforcing rules, but she ended up learning one.